Okay, so this is the kind of the second part of the mapping conversation we're having about how I put together our maps for events, specifically for adventure races. So we looked at CalTopo in the previous video, and that was really about creating the course, getting checkpoints in, syncing them with what we're doing in the field, and generating a really kind of rudimentary kind of map set at the end of that. And so what we're going to look at right now is an application called QGIS, and that is used to create our final map set. And so this is the final map set that we had for the Shenandoah Epic this year. I'll just point out some features that we're going to look at as we start working with QGIS to generate it. So checkpoint clues. So this is actually real-time data that's pulled in. If you remember, we looked at being out in the field on my mobile device. I actually typed in the description for the location I was at. That is directly pulled into my clue sheet in this location here. We've got our sheets and an index sheet here. That's all built out for us as well. You can see we've got it branded. We've got some additional logos and graphics in here. And then as soon as we start, and this is all in a PDF that we've assembled, and when we start looking at our maps, we can see we've got our forestry base map that we wanted. We've got some stylization going on with our different checkpoints. It's a lot easier for people to read. We like it when we give our maps that, we've got some color coding in here, and it's as easy for a participant to read the maps as it is someone if they're looking at our tracking page. We want it to be able to kind of tell a story. We've got our north arrows and our index and stuff in here, and then some other points to note is on this particular page you can see we've started to mash up two different map types. We've actually got our forestry map on one page, and then also where that boundary left off, we've started to build out a different base map using ScanTopo. And also at the end, we've got a custom map that was built for us by Mark Matanzi from Tanzi Navigation. And in the same way, these checkpoints located on this map here are exactly the same checkpoints and coordinates and the location as we can see in a different view of this map, which would be here. So these checkpoints are exactly the same location. We haven't moved them, we haven't dragged them and drawn them or put them in that spot. The mapping application on the back end is changing the base image and the scale for us, and everything is staying in the same place and being redrawn. So that's kind of a big overview of what we're using QGIS for. So let me kick over to that application. Now I will say that this application it does a lot. It's pretty complicated, and I'm going to kind of scratch some of the surface about some of the stuff that we use it for, or I use it for. By no means am I an expert in this, but I've been using it a while, and it takes a long time to understand how it works and what it does. If you go to QGIS on the internet, it's an application you have to download and run it from your desktop. And it really is the same kind of concept as CalTopo. You're mashing up different bits of data to make a map that kind of tells a story, but you have a massive amount more flexibility about what you're creating and what you can mash up with this application. So I'm going to start off. This is my final map, my rough map, before I make it kind of look pretty, and the way I bring it into the different sheets. I have all my checkpoints here, and they've all been stylized and made into a different color. So a few things to point out. The other reason I pay for my CalTopo version, you can actually use CalTopo for free, is if you have a paid version, you actually can connect into the API and bring the different layers over into QGIS. So this is kind of a navigation bar on the side here. It does lots of different things and lets me look at a lot of different things, but somewhere in here this is called a WMTS connector, and this actually connects to CalTopo data, and I'm able to bring in lots of different layers from CalTopo. And so one of the layers that I know I want to bring in or was using was my forestry service layer, and that was my 2016 layer. I also wanted to bring in my scan topo layer, which was in here. And so by bringing those layers in here, it brings it into this layers dialog box for me. So when you think about QGIS, what you're doing is building layers, like there's bits of data, and so you can see my hands. So maybe I have a layer that just shows my checkpoints. I have a layer that just shows my trails. I have a layer that just shows my topo. And they all build on top of each other, and you can turn them on and off. And when you layer them all on, depending on the visibility and the order, you build out your map and you determine what you want to see. So for example, in this particular layer, when let's look here, I've got my forest topo layer. So I can turn that off and you can't see it anymore. I'll turn it back on, you can see it, or I can, I've got a scan topo layer that's on underneath here, and so I can see that as well. And so these are layers that I've actually pulled in from CalTopo. There's layer sources from all kinds of other different organizations. You can build open source stuff, data you can buy, and all this different data is basically you're assembling a map to show what you want to show. So I have my layers on the side here. I can control all my different types of data, and I can turn them on and off. So that's kind of roughly how I build out my base map. So there's some other features that you can see in here too. And a lot of the stuff is now controlled by the way it looks called a style. So what I can do is, what I have done is this actual piece of data here is, when I was in CalTopo, I exported the data out into a file called a JSON file. And I'm able to import that file into QGIS, and it shows me exactly where trails were, and all the information I had in CalTopo are now pulled into QGIS. And I can now stylize that. And so I have said, and this is dig into the weeds a little bit, but this is how I kind of start making things look pretty. If I look at the properties for my layer of the data that I pulled in from my checkpoints, I have all these different crazy options about the way I can make it look. And so I'm going to look at my symbology. And what I've said is, if something is blue, and it actually happens to have this value, and so if I went back over to CalTopo and I had stylized something that was blue, it would come across in this particular application and make it look like a blue circle. And I can change that to anything I want. So say if I wanted my trekking points to look a little bit different, I could say, well, I want my trekking points actually to be this color, right? So I will change. Let me go in here a little bit deeper. Because it's actually made up of multiple components. I can say I want actually my color of these checkpoints to be more of that color. I can click OK, hit apply, and now my checkpoints have changed color. I can change the size. You can see each one is labeled. I can change the way the label looks on all of my checkpoints. So you can graphically start to change the way things look. Same with my travel areas here. If I wanted them to look slightly different, I could change my layer. I can change the way these look. So I'm really starting to use these tools within QGIS to turn layers on and off to determine how they look. So let's say, and I can also save these preferences. So I know that I want to go and print out a particular map. And so what I want to say is, I want to see my final layers. And if I turn that on, it's going to reset everything to show me exactly what my final layers look like. Let's go ahead and just change this back. So this looks right again, which was my biking points, which I know are red. So let's just make them red again. Otherwise I'll be all confused. So they're now red. And this also is scale dependent. So it's not like if it was drawn in like a raster or bitmap, as I zoomed in and out, right, these would scale up, but these are called vector images, and they're aware of what scale my map is, and so you can actually see as I zoom in and out, they resize. And so what that means, if I generate a map that's 1 to 50,000, or a 1 to 24,000, or 1 to 10,000, all my labeling and scaling and everything will be the same, which kind of gets important as you start generating maps at different scales. So from here, what I'm going to say is, well, I know I've got this map, and we want to kind of figure out how I lay out my sheets. And so I have a special layer that I can turn on, and it shows me how my sheets are going to be laid out. And this goes into the next little process about how we generate our final images. So I've kind of figured out I've got a square, and these rectangles I know at a 24,000 scale, when I print these, it's going to fit exactly on a 1 to 11 by 17. So I've got a template that I have for these bounding boxes for different scale maps, portrait and landscape. You can see I've got a portrait image here and some landscapes here. The other thing that I've got going on is some different maps underneath. So we've kind of talked about the custom map that we had from Tansy Navigation that was really for the state park. I have that in here as a separate map, and it looks like that. And so we were provided like a geo-referenced map that I can pull in here, and it shows me a lot more detail. I know I'm going to print this out at a different scale when I come and print it, but you can see my checkpoints are still in the same place. It doesn't matter what layer I've got turned on or off, it's all geo-referenced and turned on. So the last little bit of magic that goes into this is this final component called the layout manager. And when I open this up, it's going to start working with layouts that I've already created as templates. And so you can see here I've got a landscape. So I know all my sheets that are landscape, I want them to come into this particular map. And so the way that this works is I can draw different components here. So you can see I've got a map component in here, I've got an image component, I've got a legend which is actually dynamically created for me, I've got some text, and I've got we kind of talked about this is my table of information, and this is being pulled directly from all my mapping information as well. And so once I have this this particular sheet layout created, I can create what's called an atlas, and that little tool is pretty cool. Up here I can say preview my atlas, and what it's going to do is recognize the bounding boxes for each of my pages and start to create an individual sheet for each of them. And so I can start mousing through them. So this is now, it knows it's map 1, this is my map 2, and you can see it's relocated that. You can also see at the same time it's going to be updating some of my legend information up here. It dynamically knows what's on each page related to all the checkpoints, and it's going to automatically put that in there for me. And you can see we can work through that like that. Actually, this map is for 2022 Shenandoah Epic. So same principle though, all the points come in and we can work through that. I can actually come back, and what the final thing I'll want to do is maybe say, okay, let's hide my sheet layer, and then when I come back into this layer, that's going to actually be gone, and I can say let's output all my atlas pages into a PDF. We'll just call this test at the end so you can make sure you can see what it is. And what it does is go through each of my pages that I've created a boundary box for and actually dump that out for me. Now there's a ton of setup that goes into this. You can see down here my properties, I've set it 1 to 24,000. I've set up UTM grids for it. I've set up attributes that give it the right page number. So there's a lot of information and setup that kind of goes into this. But once it's set up for one particular map, or you've spent the time setting it up, it's very quick to come back and reproduce it for multiple maps. And so this has now kicked out my map for me. Depending on all the different pages, it's giving me that different information. And yeah, this is giving me my 5 pages of my particular map. Now I can go out and do my landscape maps, portrait maps, and also, for example, let's look at that other map that we have for the state park. I think I have a page set up for this that I wanted at 1 to 15,000. And so in this particular layer, you'll see, well, that doesn't look quite right. So what I need to do is come back over to here and actually, let me see, do I have I may have a layer set up for this. Shenandoah State Park, it's going to turn on my layers. You can see now I've got my map turned on for that. I'm going to close this and go back over to my park layer. Just give that a quick refresh. And now that has my base map for my park. And so the critical thing to understand is that these checkpoints are all in the same location. I haven't like gone into a graphics application and dragged these checkpoints to where I think they are, and done that for a 1 to 15,000 and a 1 to 24,000. It's all the same checkpoint locations based on a coordinate system. And then what I'm doing is changing the scale of the picture over the top to interpret the picture. And so you can see now that has that map. I can punch this out as a PDF. Let's call it that. Save it. And then the final process is, once I've done all this, is I'll just use Acrobat Distiller, and I'll put all these different sheets together, and then make sure I reduce the size. So that's a really important thing when you're doing your maps. If I put all these PDFs together, I probably end up with a file that's about 150, 200 megs. And then if I use the compress feature inside Adobe Acrobat, I'll probably end up with a file that's about 3 megs. So I say that because people send me a lot of maps and they don't ever make them smaller. And so I do a lot of kind of compressing of maps. So when we put them up online, we get a lot of requests, and I see the maps for race day. I do a lot of compressing and compiling maps that other people send me to make sure that we can put them up onto our website. So that's really the second part of how we mash this data up. Like I said, QGIS is a huge application. If you're doing any kind of mapping, definitely start off with CalTopo. Build your maps out in there. A great way for designing courses and a great way of building maps out, especially for adventure racing. And especially what we use that for is mashing stuff up. For our tracking stuff, we get a lot of stuff coming from people send us links to Strava. People send us links to Ride with GPS. I get spreadsheets with just UTM coordinates in. I get stuff that's just drawn up on a map, right? And so what I'll do is pull all these different types of information, and I use CalTopo to create kind of a base map for me. And then from there, I can do anything with that data. Usually we'll convert it into a particular file, a special type of file, and we can pull that into our tracking page. Or we can pull it into something like QGIS and do a lot more analysis for all kinds of stuff we'll create different maps for. But hopefully you found this useful. Like I said, definitely try CalTopo if you're doing any kind of map design or course design. And then if you really want to try and step up the game, try QGIS. It is a monster. It's not easy to use, but it's well supported. There's tons of user groups out there. There's tons of cool tools and plugins that you can use for it. And if you're really serious about getting into any kind of mapping, try QGIS out. There's a more commercial paid version of the same type of stuff, and it's made by Esri. If you start buying Esri applications, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. QGIS, 100% free. So hopefully you found this useful, and yeah, if you've got any comments, just throw them in below.